Hi folks, hope you're okay today. Just want to share with you a history of apologetics. Now this history doesn't cover Catholic apologetics, and there's a whole history of various other strands of Christianity which are not covered here. So it's a general, very brief survey. Sources of this material can be found on Bible.org. Bible.org, A Brief History of Apologetics. I don't know who the writer is, but if you go to Bible.org and look at Part 3, A Brief History of Apologetics, the material that I'm going to be using is from that article. So I don't claim to have done all the research myself. I've read many of the works that we're going to talk about and can fill in the blanks, but I'm giving credit to this article as well for some of the things that I'm going to be saying. First of all, we start with apologetics in Luke Acts. If you look at the prologue in the Gospel of Luke, we see these words: "Now many have undertaken to compile an account of things that have been fulfilled among us, like the accounts passed on to us by those who were eyewitnesses and servants of the word from the beginning. So it seemed good to me as well, because I have followed all things carefully from the beginning, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus." So in the Gospel of Luke, there's a clear apologetic strand there, and you can see in the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 2:26, "Therefore let all the house of Israel know beyond a doubt that God has made this Jesus whom you crucified both Lord and Christ." So the book of Acts is the book of Luke and Acts are giving you a defense of the faith, showing you the historical foundations of the Christian faith. Acts chapter 17 is a very key chapter for apologetics. It says, "After they traveled through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a Jewish synagogue. Paul went to the Jews in the synagogues, as he customarily did. On 3 Sabbath days he addressed them from the scriptures." So there's quite clearly a defense of the faith going on in the book of Acts. We read in Acts chapter 14, verse 15 and 17, "Men, why are you doing these things? We too are men, with human nature, just like you. We are proclaiming the good news to you, so that you should turn from these worthless things to the living God, who made the heaven and earth, the sea, and everything that is in them." So there's an appeal to nature, there is an appeal to scripture in this apologetic. Okay, I'm just going to continue. The writer in this article says, according to Acts 17:18, Paul's message of Jesus and the resurrection was misunderstood as teaching new deities. Roos reports this accusation in terms identical to those describing the Athenian charge against Socrates in Plato's Apology. We strongly suggest that Luke sees Paul's speeches here a Christian counterpart to the Socratic Apology. And Paul in Acts chapter 17 deals with Stoic and Epicurean philosophy. So we see the book of Luke and the book of Acts as an apologetic method. Then we have Paul's writings. We read in Romans chapter 1, Paul giving a defense of the Christian faith as against Hellenistic and Jewish apologetics. We see key text in Acts 17, in 1 Corinthians 1:21, Paul sees the wisdom of God and the cross as foolishness to man. In Galatians 4:8, he talks about men are enslaved by nature. He talks about 1 Thessalonians 4:5. He talks about the Gentiles who are living in sinful passions, 2 Thessalonians 1:8. He talks about the punishment to come. And Titus 1:16, they profess to know God, but with their deeds they deny him. So Paul's apologetic is that the Gentile world is morally corrupt, and we have Romans 1:18-28, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness," Romans 1:18. So Paul dismantles Gentile culture by showing that it's fallen in sin. We have the writer says Paul's letters elsewhere repeatedly deal with apologetic issues that rose both Jews and pagans who had confessed Christ to become associated with churches. Paul had found and developed radically different interpretations of the meaning of Christ. So we see that in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and 2. We see the apologetics moving in John's writings. He uses the word logos, as in which is Greek philosophy in the beginning. We see that in 1 John 1. This is what we proclaim to you. This is from the beginning that we have heard, that we have seen with our eyes. So here's the apologetic. It's based on eyewitness material. Peter talks about apologetics in 1 Peter chapter 3:15, but set Christ apart as Lord in your hearts, and always be ready to give an answer to anyone. Then we move on from that was some of the New Testament. Then we move on to the early church fathers. Justin Martyr, 100 to 165, a convert from Platonism, wrote Dialogue with Trypho the Jew. Justin, says the writer in Bible.org, used messianic prophecies from the Hebrew scriptures to prove that Jesus is the Messiah. In the 3rd century, we have, I think we should put Irenaeus in there as well, who defended the faith against the Gnostics. In the 3rd century, we have the Alexandrians who continued to assimilate arguments from the Platonic and Stoic philosophers as well as Jewish controversialists. Origen, 185 to 1254, gave a defense of the faith against Celsus called Contra Celsum, which gives historical defense of the resurrection. Then in the 4th and 5th centuries, pagan religions were on the wane. Christianity was becoming strong. We have Augustine, 354, 430, who basically critiqued a philosophy called Manichaeism on the Catholic and Manichaean ways of life, or true religion, or the usefulness of belief. And basically, the Manichaeans believed that good and evil were equal, and Augustine critiqued that. He was influenced by Neoplatonic philosophy, but he moved away. That became more biblical, and he wrote The City of God, which was arguably one of the most important books in history of Western thought. But Augustine was a very important philosopher and theologian who influenced apologetics. Anselm, 1033 to 1109, was an important defender of the faith. The Bible.org says the Bishop of Canterbury was one of the most creative and original philosophers a Christian church has ever produced. He emphasized the side of Augustine's view of faith and reason that viewed faith as prior to reason or understanding. For, quote, "For I do not seek to understand in order to believe, but I believe in order to understand." Quid ut intelligentiam, Bible.org article. He was famous for his development of the ontological argument. The essence of the argument is the notion of being of unsurpassable greatness is logically inescapable. The argument has been interpreted in several marked different ways. Frequently, it has been treated as rational proof of the existence of God, and such it has usually but not always been rejected both by Christian and non-Christian philosophers. He also wrote a work defending why Christ had to die on a cross, and the idea there was that that sin has infinite implications, and Christ was infinite, so could take the infinite punishment. Then you had Thomas Aquinas, who reacted against Averroes. Averroes, an Arab philosopher, who developed Aristotelian philosophy that came into Western universities, and Sir Thomas Aquinas developed a Christian philosophy in response to Averroes using Greek philosophy. He came up with 5 arguments for the existence of God, but there were only a small few pages in his Summa Theologica, which was a massive defense of the Christian faith. In the Reformation, there was a reaction against the scholastics, which were used in Aristotelianism, and a reaction against humanism. And so Luther, in 483 to 1546 emphasized the gospel and grace and true salvation. John Calvin, 1509 to 1564, in his Institutes of Christian Religion, held that faith was reasonable, says the writer in Bible.org. He also insisted that faith often seems unreasonable to us because our reason is blinded by sin and spiritual deception. The next great apologist was probably Blaise Pascal, 1623-1662. Basically, what Pascal does is kind of like a postmodern philosopher. He kind of critiques reason and shows the limitations of reason, and then shows why we need God. A brilliant scholar. Then we have the writer Joseph Butler, book of the Analogy of Religion, Natural and Revealed, the Constitution, of Course of Nature, 1736. Butler, 1792 to 1752, an Anglican bishop, sought to diffuse objections to the orthodox Christian faith posed by deists who favoured a pure natural religion that was in principle available to all people in all times and places, but that could be proved by reason. On this basis, they came to question and finally reject the notion of revealed religion that could not be rationally proved and was known only to those who had heard of revelation. Butler argued in response that the intellectual difficulties found by deists in believing Christian religion have analogies in our knowledge of the natural world. In making this case, he could assume as a given that God exists, since the deists agreed with this assumption. His use of analogies was not intended to prove either that God exists or Christianity is true, but merely that it is not unreasonable to believe in Christian revelation. Then we have the rise of the modern apologetics. We have the skeptic in the Enlightenment, David Hume, 1711-1776, who didn't even believe in causation, that there are causes and that we can reason causation. Then you have Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, in 1724-1804, who debunked the various proofs of the existence of God. The response to that was by William Paley, 1743-1805, who gave the argument for the blind watchmaker in the view of evidence of the Christian and natural theology. He also gave a strong defense of the New Testament and its historical veracity. Then you have the rise of Darwin's Origin of Species, 1859, which gave a counteract to that. Then you have the philosopher, which we go back a little bit, 1710 to 1776, Thomas Reid, the Scottish Calvinist, who said that epistemology is common sense. This had a big influence on Charles Hodge in 1797 to 1878, a Calvinist theologian who said that we can give reasonable evidences that people by common sense could see with faith. B.B. Warfield, 1851-1921, one of the last professors at Princeton, says Bible.org, before its reorganization and shift to liberal theology, continued Hodge apologetic. The thrust of Warfield's apologetic was to argue against liberalism, that Christianity, devoid of supernaturalism, is first, a Christianity that denies God, and second, really no Christianity at all. I'd also put Gresham Machen in there, who wrote Christianity and Liberalism in the field of the Princeton apologetic. You have also in 1818 to 1855 Soren Kierkegaard, who rejected the Hegelian philosopher and Lutheran Orthodoxy and dry abstract philosophical systems, and emphasized the paradox of the Christian faith. You have James Orr in 1844 to 1933, who gave the idea that Christianity is a worldview. You have Abraham Kuyper in 1837 to 1920 developed the notion, says the Bible.org, of antithesis. There is, said Kuyper, an absolute antithesis between the two sets of principles to which Christians and non-Christians are fundamentally committed. For example, God as sovereign versus man as autonomous. In short, Christians and non-Christians cannot see eye to eye on matters of fundamental principle. This apologetic meant that Kuyper saying that Christianity could not be proved because each person has their own bias and will never see the truth anyway. Kuyper's seminal ideas were, says Bible.org, was taken on by Herman Dooyeweerd in 1894 to 1975. According to Dooyeweerd, traditional apologetics, especially that of Thomas Reid, was based on unbiblical dualism between nature and grace, between what can be known by the non-Christian by nature through reason alone and what can be known by God's gracious revelation through faith. The task of philosophy is to commend the Christian worldview while exposing the inadequacy of other worldviews to provide secure footing for knowledge and ethics. Another Christian thinker was Cornelius Van Til, 1894 to 1987, professor of apologetics at Westminster Theological Seminary. Van Til's approach, this is Bible.org, was essentially a creative synthesis of old Princetonian Kuyperian philosophical apologetic positions. He agreed with the common sense realist view taught at Old Testament that sense perception, logic, moral values, and the like were guaranteed to us by God's creating us in the world. He also agreed with old Princeton that apologetics should offer proofs for the Christian position. Van Til integrated this position with the Kuyperian doctrine of antithesis. So basically, people are biased and we have to look at their presuppositions. The next thinker is C.S. Lewis, 1898 to 1963, who wrote on the problem of pain, the Screwtape Letters Made Christianity, and gave historical evidence of the Christian faith, and influenced the Catholic philosopher and theologian Peter. You have Karl Barth in 1886 to 1968, who particularly I'm not particularly fond of, I don't think, because he wasn't an inerrantist. But he rejected liberalism, and he had his own kind of existential defense of the faith, which I don't think was good or wise. You had conservative evangelicals, says the Bible.org, but they weren't that conservative, which was Bernard Ramm and Donald Blosch, who kind of agreed with Barth. If you agree with Barth, you're going down the wrong path. More conservative evangelical scholars such as Gordon H. Clark, 1902 to 1985, a Reformed philosopher whose emphasis on deductive logic led to fierce debate with Van Til, and then Carl F. Henry, 1932-03, one of the leaders of the New Evangelicalism. Carl F. Henry's book on apologetics, massive work, it's quite an interesting read. He kind of looks at different worldviews and critiques them. The second major apologist, 1950, was Edward John Carney, 1919 to 1965, another evangelical who was president of Fuller Seminary, kind of gone downhill now. Carnell's book set a form of presuppositional apologetic that approached Christianity as a hypothesis, a semi-presuppositional apologetic, as a hypothesis to be verified by showing that it alone is systematically consistent and practically viable or livable. Gordon Lewis defended Cornelian approach to apologetics. Then you have Stuart Hackett, who critiqued Van Til, and William Lane Craig was influenced by Hackett. William Lane Craig giving sophisticated philosophical and historical arguments for the Christian faith. You have Robert D. Kunzen, a former student of Van Til, 1924-2000, became his colleague at Westminster, where he taught apologetics. According to Kunzen, Van Til's apologetic is best understood as transcendental, that is, one that presents Christianity as the only position that can give an adequate account of the possibility of truth, reason, value, and our existence. John Frame used the perspective method and Vernus J. Poythress, where they kind of, in his book, The Doctrine of the Knowledge of God, gave a multi-perspective way of defending the faith, using presuppositionalism, but other ways of doing it as well. You have John Montgomery, 1970s, critic of Van Til, a Lutheran apologist who contributed to an essay in Jerusalem and Athens entitled Once Upon a Priory, that characterized Van Til's position as abandoning all reason argument for the Christian faith. G.P. Moreland made contribution to the philosophy of science and historical reliability of the Gospels. Clark Pinnock made some good defenses, but has recently moved away from evangelical faith. Norman Geisler, an evangelical scholar, has argued for a classical apologetic based mainly on the thought of Thomas Aquinas. Francis Schaeffer, was 1912 to 1984, was specifically writing to combat relativism. Alvin Plantinga, says Bible.org, published his God and Other Minds. In this and other books, Plantinga led the way in developing a school of thought known as the New Reformed Epistemology, which basically says you don't have to give a defense of the faith. You believe, and we all believe, so that's reasonable. It's kind of his argument anyway. C. Stephen Evans, more of a subjectivist, influenced by Kierkegaard. Interesting guy. I really like him, but I don't agree with some of his apologetic method. David K. Clark, whose book Dialogical Apologetics defends a person-centered approach. Some books to recommend to read: Colin Brown, Christianity and Western Thought, A History of Philosophers, Ideas and Movements, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Bush, L. Roos, Classical Readings in Christian Apologetics, Grand Rapids, Zondervan, Academy, 1983. William Lane Craig, The Historical Argument for the Resurrection of Jesus During the Days Controversy, Texts and Studies, 23 Lewison, N.Y. Edwin Millen Press, 1985. John Frame, Cornelius Van Til, An Analysis of His Thought, Philsberg, N.J. Presbyterian and Reform, 1995. Ronald B. Mayer's Balanced Apologetics Uses Evidences and Presuppositions in Defense of the Faith, Grand Rapids, Griegel, 1996. Van Til, A Christian Theory of Knowledge, Philsberg, N.J. Presbyterian and Reform, 1969. I'd put Francis Schaeffer, God Who Is, I think a look at Francis Schaeffer, Escape from Reason, He Is There and He Is Not Silent, True Spirituality, A Christian Manifesto, The God Who Is There, How Should We Then Live, The Mark of the Christian. These are books, Art and the Bible, 2 essays, Genesis in Space and Time, The Complete Works of Francis Schaeffer. C.S. Lewis books, Mere Christianity, Screwtape, and The Problem of Pain, The Abolition of Man, Grief Observed. So those are some of C.S. Lewis books. A lot more that we could have covered in that survey. If you want to read a really good book on apologetics, Philosophical Foundation for a Christian Worldview, James Porter Moreland and William Lane Craig, very sophisticated piece of work, and On Guard, Defending Your Faith with Reason and Precision by William Lane Craig. The Kalam Cosmological Argument, William Lane Craig. God and Stephen Hawking, Whose Design Is It Anyway, by John C. Lennox. God's Undertaker, Science-Buried God, John C. Lennox. And R.C. Sproul's The Defender of the Faith. Okay, so those are some books that you can read. Don't forget the article. It's at bible.org. It's not an extensive history of apologetics. I mean, there's loads of things that we could have talked about, the new movements in apologetics today, but it gives you a rough kind of idea of apologetics, and I hope that's been a help to you. For me, the apologists that have been a great help to me, Greg Banson's been a great help to me, Van Til's been a help to me, William Lane Craig's been a help to me, J.P. Morgan's been a help to me, R.C. Sproul's been a help to me. Many of the old great apologists like the Princeton theologians have been a help to me, such as Charles Hodge, B.B. Warfield, Gresham Machen, Robert Dick Wilson. These have been great inspiration to me. Gerard Voss, Herman Bavinck, John Calvin, Luther, Athanasius, Irenaeus. These have all been a massive influence on me and in my understanding of defending the faith. So I hope that's been a help to you. We've not gone into the arguments, but we just looked at some of the key players and the opportunities there for you to go and study and read and meditate and think through your faith. All right, hope that's been a blessing to you. Take care and God bless.